should you consider incorporating? There are a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about incorporation. The main thing that comes to people's heads is tax. When you incorporate, you can save tax, which, depending on the circumstance, can be true. The corporate tax rates in Ontario are 15% now, versus the highest marginal personal tax rate in Ontario is 54.54%. So that's a big spread between those tax rates. So there are definitely tax components that play in here, but there are a lot of other things as well. There's liability considerations, there's estate planning considerations, what happens if someone's going to sell their business at some point in the future. So many other considerations when you're thinking about incorporating. So the liability consideration involves the actual definition of a corporation. So a corporation is actually a separate legal entity. So you can think of it as being its own person. So if someone is operating a sole proprietorship, that is part of themselves. So if they were to be sued or if something were to happen along those lines, then people could go after their personal assets. Whereas if they are incorporated, that corporation is completely separate from them. It's a separate person, so it's only the corporate assets that would be involved in liability in that circumstance. So estate and succession planning, there's many different answers to how estate and succession planning can play into the decision of whether to incorporate or not. Many of them have to do with how the business is passed on, who it's passed on to, and really thinking about how that transaction is going to happen ahead of time. So if you were to bring on a child, for example, into a corporation, there's a share structure that can make that happen, which can be beneficial for tax purposes. Okay, so the key things that you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about incorporation are the main thing is if you are spending all of your money personally, or if you have some left over at the end of the day. So the reason being that if you have money left over, or if you're reinvesting money in your business, that's when you're going to reap the benefits of the tax rates within a corporation. If you're spending it all personally, then you're going to be taking all of that money out of the corporation and paying personal tax rates on it anyways. So you're negating the benefits of lower corporate tax rates. The other questions that you want to ask yourself are you planning on selling your business at some point in the future? If you are, then there are many tax considerations that are involved. Incorporating can definitely help with that. Are there income splitting considerations? So do you have a spouse? Does that spouse earn income, or is that income considerably less than yours? If so, then there could be a benefit of setting up a corporation and having some of the income that you require personally diverted to your spouse so that he or she can pay tax at lower rates, depending on what tax bracket they're in, what the liability considerations are. So maybe you are spending all of your money, maybe you don't have money left at the end of the day, but you're operating a business that has a lot of liability associated with it. It may not be a tax question then, it may be a liability only consideration. So that's another thing to consider. The costs that you're looking at that are associated with incorporation, there are two sets of costs. So there's the actual cost of incorporation, and then there are the annual filing costs that you're going to incur as well. So the cost of incorporation, there will be two sets of costs. There will be an accounting component, which the accountants will plan what your corporate structure will look like to make it most beneficial from a tax perspective, and the legal cost or the actual cost of incorporating the business. So you need a lawyer to do that. So there are two sets of costs associated with that. The costs can range depending on how complicated the corporate structure is. Usually together you're looking at somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 between the accountant and the lawyer. And then on an annual basis, you're required to file corporate tax returns. So that filing is a little bit more complex than the sole proprietorship form that goes along with your personal tax return. So the costs are a little bit higher on an annual basis. Depending on the type of financial statements that you require along with that filing, which you do require financial statements of some sort because they have to be filed with the tax return. So depending on what level of financial statements you need, it can cost anywhere from $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, depending on what it is on an annual basis. That's something that you'd want to talk to your accountant about ahead of time. So the key considerations when you're thinking about incorporation are you spending all of your money, or do you have some left over at the end of the day? Do you have income splitting opportunities that you can take advantage of? Do you have liability considerations that you need to factor in? And do you have the money to invest in your business on an annual basis to make incorporation worthwhile for you? I'd say are the main takeaways. And then you have some of the additional ones, which is, are you going to sell your business in the near future, or maybe a few years down the road? Succession planning, estate planning, those are some of the other more complicated considerations that you'd again want to talk to your advisors about. Can you do it by yourself? Technically, yes, you could do it by yourself if you wanted to. Would it be right? Probably not. You probably wouldn't get your corporate structure right. The tax filings are rather complicated, and you probably wouldn't be able to do those on your own. And the cost, if you decide, we sometimes have people that will decide to incorporate themselves without the advice of advisors like accountants and lawyers. Those people actually end up incurring more costs down the road because they don't set up the corporation right in the first place, and to fix something that isn't set up right in the first place actually ends up costing more money. So I do advise people to speak to someone before they go out and just decide to incorporate a company. Make sure that it's the right option for you, and invest in it. If the decision is to invest in your company, then take that time and invest in your company and make sure that it's set up properly and that you're moving forward the best way possible.